Welcome to Transformative Principal, episode 101. Today, I am honored to have Brian Costello on the program with me. He is in his 7th year of teaching in southern New Jersey, and he is currently teaching first and second grades, and he teaches math, science, and social studies for those grades, and his kids actually rotate through those different content areas, much like they do in secondary schools, so that's an interesting thing that we'll talk about. We're also going to talk about how to deal with people who are not very nice on staff. And Brian is a courageous man who has stood up to those around him, and I'm excited to hear his stories about that today. So welcome to the program, Brian. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Transformative Principal.
Thank you very much for having me, Jethro. I'm really excited to be on.
So Brian and I have been in a Voxer group for a while now, and I've been following him on Twitter, and he is a fantastic educator that I learn a lot from. And I greatly admire anyone who teaches those lower primary grades, because I feel like you have to be a special kind of human being to work with kids that are so full of energy and excitement and have so few skills still. And he must have great patience to be able to work with those kids. Do you want to talk a little bit about what it's like working with kindergarten and first and second grades?
So working with the youngest kids provides you with some things that I guess working with kids as they get older starts to disappear. Teachers always talk about that moment where you see kids light up because they've got something. With younger kids, there's so many things they don't know. There's so many times that they get something for the first time that it's almost like every day you have kids who light up with excitement, that find that joy of learning something for the first time. You really get a chance to see that daily, and it becomes absolutely just, you talk about that energy, you feed off that energy, and you build off of it. And between that and, lots of coffee, you can keep up with them for a while.
And yeah, the keeping up with them, I think, is the difficult part. I was a assistant principal in elementary school before my current position, and had never worked in elementary school. Had only subbed, and it was seeing those light bulbs go off in those kids' eyes day after day was really a neat thing that is easy to forget when you're working with middle school students who don't have those light bulbs nearly as often as the young kids. Talk a little bit about how switching for those content areas works at an elementary school and how that goes. Because in my last interview, we talked about how important it is for kids that young to have some consistency with who they're seeing, so that the fewer transitions lead to more success in being on task and doing what they're supposed to. So it's a very fascinating, different perspective. Talk a little bit about that.
So this is our first year doing it. The thought process being we're such a small school that so for our first through fourth grade are switching for the first time this year. Our fifth through eighth grade are middle school. Kindergarten to fourth are our lower school. And so it's the first time that we're doing it. So we're working out a lot of the kinks, a lot of the little bugs, things, finding out where the pockets of time are that we're losing. And the thought process behind it was to obviously give our teachers a chance to focus more specifically on a content area and really become better at teaching those specific areas. So I will say that I have been able to come up with better projects, come up with better ideas, improve my specific instructional abilities in math, in science, and in social studies, because I don't have to focus on language arts other than how it incorporates.
Yeah.
So, that's a benefit. I agree with that conversation that you were talking about completely from your interview, is that there are some definite drawbacks in terms of building, at least this first year, in terms of building the connections with your kids. But what happens is, since we are a first and second grade flip, so we're so small, we have our one class per grade level. So what happens is I'll loop with my kids for every year. So my first graders will be back with me again next year in second grade. And since I taught first grade last year, the second graders are that class this year. So each year I end up with them for a second year. So that relationship is built, especially in the second year. So I am noticing that my second grade class is a little easier for me than my first grade class. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that the relationships are already established. So that that time constraint that we have isn't as big of a problem. It just kind of goes pretty easily. The relationship's already built.
Yeah, that sounds like a very good thing that you're looping with the kids. And in episode 90, where I interviewed Piper Riddle, she does a dual immersion school. And so they have the Chinese teachers teaching math and the English speaking teachers teaching the language arts and social studies and science and things like that, so that they can see, they can do something similar to what you're doing, where they're breaking up the content areas a little bit. That's for a very specific reason, to be able to teach Chinese. And it's fascinating what you're doing. I imagine that causes you to have to collaborate in a different and possibly more with other teachers, because you're sharing kids with them. Is that a good assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, fortunately for me, I work with a really, really fantastic partner, and her and I collaborate pretty much all on everything. We actually have been doing conferences together this week, which for me is a bit of a shift, because I'm one of the few teachers who really likes conferences. I don't know if that's global, but I know that most teachers are like, oh man, I have 10 minutes to talk to parents. And I think, oh boy, I only have 10 minutes to talk to this parent. I could talk to this parent for an hour about their kid without even breaking their report card out of the envelope. We could talk forever. So that for me, was definitely a challenge, but we collaborate pretty much. We talk every single day about what's going on back and forth between the kids, what's happening in both classes, because like you said, there's a lot of nuances to young kids and how they react to different situations and how the group dynamic shifts from one class to another, which has also been very interesting to see, for certain kids reacting different ways in different environments. But all day, every single day, before and after school, we plan things together. We work out plans for kids in terms of interventions, behaviors, things like that, all as part of a team, and then specifically with the two of us.
Yeah, and so one of the things that happens when you have to collaborate more with other teachers is that sometimes there are conflicts and differences in opinion, and typically as teachers we can work those things out by talking about it and sharing our thoughts and feelings. And sometimes there are situations where someone is just being mean and is treating you not in a healthy way. And, you shared a story a while ago about that. And can you share that story again now?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll preface this with the fact that I work with almost an entirely a staff full of people who are supportive and positive. And it was towards the end of my second year and almost like the last week or two. And I was getting ready to leave in the afternoon, and a teacher had come down and asked me to correct something on cumulative folders for the kids that I had the year before. And I wasn't aware that I had not done them properly. The person who I had showed me a way to do them, and there was something that I had left out. I left out information from their previous year's report cards. I said, okay, I'll get to it, and then turned around and walked away. The next morning I came in, and they were on my desk, the folders, which the folders never leave the office. They were on my desk with a note from my boss that said, you need to correct this. So I had my instructional aide read a story to my class, and I immediately fixed that. It took me 5 minutes. It really wasn't a big deal at all, but it was a few minutes. And after that, I was talking to another teacher that I was friends with, and she said, yeah, this teacher was in my classroom cursing your name and screaming and yelling about how you didn't do your job properly, and that she couldn't understand why you weren't doing this and that. She said, I just sat there and listened, because
what else are you going to do?
Yeah, what else are you going to do when someone comes in? Basically, people had learned to just ignore her and go about their business, because she was going to come in and rant and rave and if you disagreed with her, then she'd just be mean to you. I said, that's ridiculous. I wasn't even given the opportunity to do this, to correct the mistake. Mistake I wouldn't have known about being a first-year teacher last year. And so this was 6 years ago, just to clarify that, because I don't know if I made that clear in the story at the beginning. But I don't know if you could tell, but I get my heart rate gets up a little bit as I start talking about this.
So, and let me stop you there for just a second. This is something that happens, unfortunately, frequently enough that people listening are saying, yep, I've been through that. I've had a teacher yell at me about another teacher, or I've had a teacher get mad at me about me, or something like that. And for some reason, I don't understand what it is, but people are in education and act that way when they can be super patient with kids or not. And then when it comes to working with adults, then they really struggle. And that's a very real issue that some people in education deal with. And they can be hurtful, they can be mean, they can be disrespectful. And it does cause other people to have their heart rates increase. It causes them to be nervous and to be uncomfortable in the work environment. And, those things are common enough that they can be very damaging to a school's culture.
Yeah, absolutely. And to have, this one person just venting out this anger pretty much in all directions is definitely not good. It wasn't something that I wanted to hear. I didn't want to be, I didn't want to be a party to it. So, and I had been on this person's good side because I was aware that I should stay on this person's good side.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like, you need to be on this person's good side so they don't yell at you, which is just an unhealthy thing that nobody wants to have to deal with.
Absolutely. So my response to this, after thinking about it for a little bit, by the end of the day that day, I sent her an email. I thought it was probably for the best that I didn't go directly to her to confront her. I didn't want to get angry myself. I typically try to take those things in and process them out before I respond, so that I don't want to respond in anger and say something that's inappropriate or say something that I don't mean to say, because then I'm being no different than the person who's coming at me. So my response was to send her an email. My email just plainly said, I thought this was professionally discourteous of you to, I didn't even get 24 hours to correct the problem before you brought it to the attention of our superior, our boss, our supervisor, who's both the principal and the superintendent of the school. And I also found it to be incredibly disrespectful that you were in other teachers' rooms cursing about me about this particular thing. I said it was corrected quickly. It wasn't really a big deal, and I'd appreciate it if in the future you'd come to me face to face and air out this problem with me first before you bring it to our boss. That would be the appropriate professional response. And I copied that email to my boss. So basically, she got a copy. Our school administrator got a copy. I did not hear back from her other than, actually, no, that was not true. I got a one-sentence email back saying that she felt threatened when I told her that I would get to report cards. I was literally or the cume folders. I was literally walking up the door. I said, okay, I'll get to it. And I had witnesses who saw this. So then the next morning, my administrator brought me in and she thanked me for standing up for myself, for not allowing her to push me around, because it was something that a lot of people had been doing. And she'd been obviously not just doing it to me, but to everyone in the building.
So what I think is fascinating here is that you confronted that person directly. You stated the appropriate professional response, and then your supervisor appreciated what you did and said thank you and recognized that was a powerful way for you to do that. How did you feel doing that? Were you nervous to send an email to her confronting her?
At the time, I wasn't. I think maybe I might have been a little naive, being still relatively new at the school. But at the same time, when you think about how you treat people, says a lot about you and how you feel. And my thought was, I could say nothing, but then what? What happens next? Is she going to keep doing this to me? For some reason, I all of a sudden became, I ended up in the crosshairs, and for really no reason. It was a simple mistake that could have been skipped over, and I could have come back and fixed it after she had done the work she needed to do. But I had inconvenienced her for a matter of several hours, apparently, and that was enough for her to try and make me look bad, basically throw me under the bus in front of our boss. And my thought was, that's not how I would want anybody to treat me, and that's not how I would treat anybody else. And so I immediately responded. Within a few hours, I responded that way because I can't really see why anybody should treat other people that way.
Well, and you also show from your perspective how you would want to be treated. You would want somebody to say directly to you, hey, you made a mistake here and we need to fix this. And that is an appropriate and professional way to deal with the issue that doesn't have to hurt anybody's feelings, states it clearly and plainly, and doesn't evolve emotion in the situation also. So what's fascinating is that you say, this is how I want people to treat each other in a professional environment. And that is, You come out and you say it to that person, you deal with it, you make sure that it's out on the table. The response, though, is I felt threatened from her, and there's a psychology term called projection, and I don't know all the psychological ways of describing that, but basically what it means is that those who act in a certain way assume everybody else would act in the same way as them. So she would be threatening to you because of what you did, because that's how she would act. And so she assumes that you'll act that same way, when really that's not the case. Most people wouldn't act that way, and most people don't. But there are just a few people here and there that do act that way. And, it seems that everybody puts up with them. And it's not often that someone does what you did and actually confronts them and says, I don't appreciate being treated this way. Please don't treat me this way.
And I would say that when I was reflecting on this later on, like after the fact, and I was talking to, friends and mentors about this, and I said, this was the decision that I needed to make for myself. And they said, yeah, well, she's just me. And I said, maybe it's something else. But if that's the way that she responds to things, then that's sad. And I don't want that for her. I'd rather her. So basically after that, I was torn between, how do I interact with this person? How do I treat this person? Because they're not going anywhere. I mean, she's got a job there until she retires, probably, because she's not a bad teacher. She just has this tendency to get angry with people and express it in a way that's unhealthy, I think. And so for me, I was thinking, I'm going to be nice to her. So I went out of my way to be nice to her. I said two things can happen. Either she's going to be nice to me and realize that this isn't that I have no hostility towards her, or it's going to make her even more angry. But either way, she's not going to get to me. She's not going to make me angry with her. And I'm going to go about my job, my experience in the building, by spreading that positivity instead of, reciprocating a negative response.
Yeah. And that's really important too, because whether or not someone makes you mad, you still need to be nice to them, do supportive things like you would for anybody else. And as a peer, that's a different relationship than an administrator to someone. And regardless, you should still treat people how you want to be treated. And you should still treat people with respect, because they're people just like you. And so, sometimes those things can get lost, and people may not see what you're doing to support them. But the truth is that if that's really how you live your life, and that's how I personally believe I should live my life also, then you can still do those things and try to help people as much as you can. And that's what you have to do if that's how you live your life. Absolutely.
And I'd say, honestly, she probably didn't talk to me almost at all for a whole year. Even I'd say hello and she'd just keep on going. And then over time, she would say hello back. And now we have, I go out of my way to make sure that open the door for her, or if something bad happened, I'd, offer my sympathy, or I'd offer my support. And, we now have at least a cordial relationship where I don't think that there's any animosity, which is interesting. Now, yeah, I just think it's interesting how that developed. But the thought is, well, from people when I was initially, before I had this interaction with her, was that you wouldn't want to aggravate her, because then you would be under fire and she would be after you, or whatever the common thought was. It just wasn't healthy to be afraid of that.
Yeah, it's dysfunctional to be afraid of that, right? And we need to be functional in our relationships at work and in what we do. And that dysfunction doesn't help anybody. And it certainly doesn't help our kids. It doesn't help us as human beings. So yeah, we need to be functional, and we need to find ways to get over ourselves in spite of ourselves, and, still extend that olive branch to people, even when it seems like they may not be interested in that. That's what we need to do, no matter what they've done to us, Yeah,
I mean, at the end of the day, I'm there to make things better for kids, and I'm there to make the place better for kids. And part of that for me, especially as primary grade teacher, you hear a lot about modeling for kids. And especially for me as a male teacher in the primary grades, one of the things that I try to model for my kids is appropriate, non-aggressive, non-violent problem solution. And, what better situation to do it in than when you're actually having a conflict with someone. Now, granted, I don't go and tell my kids about this particular thing, but regardless of whether you tell people about something or not, you should be doing those things. You should be living those things so that, when you look your kids in the eye and say, yeah, this isn't the appropriate way to solve a problem, with yourself and they can tell your honesty when you're talking to them.
Bam! That's all I got to say about that.
And it's funny how it comes up. We were talking a little bit ago about, before the show, we were talking about, and I mentioned that this is coming up again with this teacher and a newer staff member who said, she came in my office and she was yelling at me, and I just said, stand up to her. And she told me what she wanted to say to her, and I said, that's probably a bad choice. I said, because she'll turn around and report you for that, because that's I think that's what she's going for, is to prompt that emotional negative response. And then all of a sudden, boom, you're the one in trouble and she's the one who started this problem. I said, so, just temper the way you want to respond and respond. Like this would, the appropriate way to respond is just say, hey, that's unprofessional. And I appreciate it if you didn't do this to me anymore. It's inappropriate, and I don't deserve to be treated like this. End of story. You wouldn't expect kids to treat other kids that way. And, I wouldn't expect adults, in the building where I work to treat other adults that way either.
Yeah, absolutely. Such a good lesson. Thank you for being a good example to other teachers. Thank you for sharing that story. I'm sure that is difficult to do, but I appreciate it, and I know that it'll help someone who's listening. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I hope other people can do the same thing. When you had mentioned to me that you didn't think this was the kind of thing that people did often, I was surprised. Not that it happens, I guess, often in my school. It just didn't occur to me that it was the kind of thing that people don't do on the regular basis, to stand up for themselves and say, I deserve to be treated with respect, because that's what we teach our kids to do. And so, yeah, I hope that more people will respectfully and politely say, this is not appropriate.
Yeah. And absolutely. So that was a great interview with Brian. He really is amazing, and I'm so proud of him for standing up to someone who was treating him inappropriately. And, that's a difficult thing to do for anybody. And, he said that he wasn't really nervous, but he did also say that his heart was still racing when he thought about that interaction. So, that it's a difficult thing. And I hope that him sharing his story will help you and some of your teachers in doing the same thing, because it is important that we treat people with respect. And part of that is making sure that they conduct themselves in a professional manner. If you have enjoyed what you've been listening to here, please subscribe to this podcast and leave a rating in iTunes. Also, if you sign up for the newsletter on the website, transformativeprincipal.org, I will send you the 5 ways to be a transformative principal. At the end of every interview, I ask the principals how to do that, and I've compiled all the best answers they've given and put them in the top 5 that we've heard. It's made me a better principal. I believe it'll make you a better principal also. I've been your host, Jethro Jones. Thank you for listening to Transformative Principal Podcast. Transformative Principal is a proud member of the Edu Podcast Network. If you want to learn something new, check out Jennifer Gonzalez's Cult of Pedagogy podcast. She's got a great website with beautiful design and produces really great content all the time.